Well, certainly we do live in a world of lies today, ladies and gentlemen, we do. And most of these lies are perpetuated and do continue simply because people share them so openly and simply believe what they are told. And very often you'll find that this is almost a default action. It's just the way people have been trained to operate. And very often they're not even aware that they're doing it. And you can notice this by simply listening to any workplace conversation. You find that most people, the conversations that they have, they're usually talking about what they saw on the television or what they read in the newspapers or gossiping about what their friends are up to or whatever. But if it's something to do with the world or something to do with life, it's based on what the television told them or what they read in the newspapers. But you'll find that most people's conversation, their everyday conversation, is about a television show that they watched the night before. Or perhaps in these days not so much a television show, perhaps something that they saw on Instagram or something that they saw on Netflix. Whatever it is that's trending at the time. And even taking it further and looking at it from a philosophical perspective, people will often argue their concept of reality with others based not on their own personal experience, but based on stuff they've read, based on stuff they've been told, based on ideas that have been put into their head through textbooks or studies that have been conducted by other people, but not anything that they have experienced in real life. A great example of this is the education and political systems. People just believe whatever the teachers at the school tell them because the teachers believe whatever is written in the textbooks. And when the government brings information to people, people simply believe it because it's the result of a government study. And of course, this isn't a messy independent study, this is a government study. Simply the process of adding the word government to the phrase, instead of making it a normal study, making it a government study, seems to add this air of security to people, and they simply believe what they're told, and they believe it must be accurate because it was done by the government, and the government would have made sure that there was no inaccuracies in there because, of course, it's the government, and the government is just so trustworthy and so responsible. In fact, I've actually had people use that as a form of evidence when they've been debating a fact. If you show them some evidence, they'll say, oh, but hang on, this is from a government study. And if you try to debate them, they'll say, yes, but that doesn't matter because this is a government study. And that's really all they need to make their mind up. But really, when you look at government, folks, government has a track record of telling barefaced lies. In fact, that's all government ever really does. So why anyone would believe a government study is really beyond me. The government does the opposite of everything that it says it's doing. It just disguises it so it looks like it's doing the right thing when really it's doing the wrong thing. This is just the way governments work. The only reason the government would even do a study on anything is because a point is being debated, or perhaps the truth is getting out to people and they want people to believe a certain thing, so they will launch a government study simply to control the narrative. And therefore all debate will be squashed and you must believe what the government says, and any debate past that point is irrelevant because the government already said this is the way it is. They simply say this is, and anybody who says anything else is spreading fake news and may be penalised and may even be subject to arrest the way the laws are going. And that's the way it goes, folks. But as I said, you've got to look at government, and their entire track record is one of barefaced lies, and what you really see if you step back and look at things is that they do the opposite of everything that they say they're doing. A great example of this is the current process that is happening in China, the moving of all of the people from the country into the ghost cities that have been built in China. Remember I was talking about this a couple of weeks ago. I mentioned the ghost cities. And anyone who's unfamiliar with that, just look up the term ghost cities, just search it on the internet and you'll find that there's been dozens of cities built across China which are all standing there unoccupied. And you've got to wonder what these cities are for. Well, what they're doing now is they're pulling all the farmers out of the farming regions and out of the more rural regions of the country, and they're bringing them to live in all of these cities. And this is being done by the government. It's being done under the guise of a humanitarian project. They now have an initiative they've launched in China that they claim will end all poverty. That's what they're doing. They're finding people in poor districts and poor regions, and they are tailoring a program for these families specifically to lift them out of poverty, is what they're saying. Sounds wonderful, doesn't it? A process which will leave no poor people, no poverty anywhere in China. How delightful for everybody. What they're actually doing is making sure everyone is working, everyone has a job, everyone is in a city, and therefore everyone is subject to the new Chinese surveillance system with no dark corners anywhere in China where anybody can hide, where everyone is monitored in every aspect of their lives, and everyone is subject to the new Chinese social credit system. And here we see them doing it under the guise of a massive humanitarian project to end poverty. So you can see how they disguise things and where it's really leading. And all governments do this, folks, and make no mistake about it, this is what Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030 is about as well. It isn't just about preserving rural regions and preserving and protecting nature. It's getting everybody into a situation where they can be confined into a concentrated population zone and kept under 24-hour-a-day surveillance in every single aspect of their lives. And like I said, it all sounds very wonderful, lifting people up out of poverty and making sure everyone has a job. But what if you don't want a job? What if you're a farmer? What if your job is looking after your animals, looking after your crops, and looking after your family and caring for your house? What if you're an artist? What if you're someone who simply likes living in the country and doesn't want to live in a city and doesn't want to do some government-designated job and take home some government-designated wage and walk between the government-designated lines? What if you want to be someone who lives in your traditional house where your family grew up and you would like your children to be living in the country and experiencing that type of life? Well, under the new system, you simply won't be allowed to. You have to come and live in the city, and if you go and do other things, well, then you'll lose social crediting points, you'll lose purchasing power, you'll be squeezed out of the system, and you'll become an undesirable, and you'll end up in the smart prison. And people will accept that and see that that is okay for that to happen to you, because why would you not be complying with what the government wants you to do? You must be an untrustworthy person. And we're seeing this now in China because many of the people who are being scooped up out of these rural areas and taken to the cities have lived in the country their whole lives. They've grown up as farmers and they simply don't want to live in the city. And so once they're put there, they go, well, what are we doing here? And they pack up and they go back to where they came from, only to find that their house has been destroyed, their land has been razed, it's all been reclaimed by the government, and the life that they had simply doesn't exist anymore because their traditional lands are no longer there, and they don't have any choice but to go and work at some job that they've never done before, that they hate doing in a city, because it's now the only home that they have. And again, all of this being done under the guise of a humanitarian effort to lift people out of poverty. But really, it's not about any of that. It's about surveillance and it's about control. And when you look at the Chinese system, I mean, the people, Rothschilds, Rockefellers, all of the bankers, the banking cartels that have been running the world for so long, are heavily involved in the Chinese system. They love the Chinese work ethic and they would love to see it brought out into all of our countries as well. And it's happening, folks. It's just being done in a more gradual way. I mean, it's a lot easier to get away with in China because the Chinese people are so compliant. But in the West, it needs to be done in a different way. And they're doing it through the surveillance devices that we're all buying ourselves, the Alexas that people are having in their home, the new Google Home device that people are buying, the surveillance apps on their phones, just their phones themselves, the way their phones are taking over their lives. The whole surveillance system is being brought online in Western countries as well, the same as the Chinese system. It's just being done in a different way. Chinese will simply roll over on command, but the people in the West need to be tricked into it, and the main way they're going to do that is through fear. You know, once you do have these devices in your home, and once you do realize you're being surveilled in everything you say and do, then you start policing your own thoughts, and society starts policing itself and leading itself into the smart grid, where it gradually becomes compliant simply because it's scared to do anything other than be compliant. But there's a lot of people that I think would probably accept martial law at this stage simply because they would think it was about the removal of the deep state. They don't realize that the deep state is the state. The deep state is there because the state is there. The deep state is what happens when the state closes the doors and the television cameras are turned off. It's all the one mechanism, ladies and gentlemen, the same as the world governments are all one mechanism and all one organism as well. All of this theatre of conflict and all of these nations facing off against each other, it's all theatre for the masses, ladies and gentlemen. The whole thing is a charade. It's one big puppet show. They all work together for a common goal. And that common goal seems to be the further destruction of any trace of our real history and the shifting of the entire human race into this digital dystopia that's been created around us. Because that's where it's all leading. And of course, something else that seems to be looming very real on the horizon is depopulation, or an event that is going to lead to depopulation. Perhaps another reset, if that's what you want to call it. But the destruction of our past and destruction of our history and the destruction of knowledge is a really, really huge part of what's happening. You know, all of the conflicts in Syria, all of the conflicts in the Middle East, the whole conflict in Syria has been mainly about destroying the infrastructure, destroying all the ancient monuments, all the ancient temples, any trace of what we had in the past. And so much of the way it's been played has been a distraction. It's been theatre just to keep us looking in the wrong direction. The whole spectre of Israel, the way it's been constructed to be this struggling, fledgling democracy, well, we know it isn't. We know it's exactly the opposite of that. And this is all being exposed, and Israel is set to fail. Of course it's set to fail because it was set up to fail. Even Henry Kissinger has recently said in 10 years there will no longer be a state of Israel. And everyone's been thinking, oh no, it's all about the Greater Israel Project. And sure, the Greater Israel Project is a reality, but really, when you look at the inordinate amount of influence the Israeli system has, what we're talking about is Bolsheviks. These people are Bolsheviks. And if you go and look at the history of Bolshevism, that's who the people who control Israel are. And what happened in the Bolshevik Revolution was absolutely horrendous. It was the result of Judaism, because Bolshevism is rooted in Judaism, as is communism rooted in Judaism. And if you look at that and you look at the inordinate amount of influence that these people have all around the world already, you begin to see that Greater Israel doesn't matter because the world is Greater Israel, and it already is. They're just solidifying the plan. And all of this stuff has been a distraction because it's all been about this smart grid. It's all been about this digital system that is coming online, the social crediting system, the surveillance state. This is what it's always been about. And in such a state, it doesn't matter who controls what countries. It doesn't matter which country is what. It doesn't matter what people you belong to. It doesn't matter what nation you belong to. It doesn't matter what nationality or race or religion or creed or culture you are, because it's all going to be contained within the one surveillance system. That's what it's heading to, and that's what it's always been heading to. Israel doesn't matter. It was set up to fail. It was set up for us to waste our energy screaming at it. It's soon not going to be there because it wasn't ever supposed to be there, because it's irrelevant. It was never created as something to be cared about, as something to last. It was simply created as a mechanism. It's simply part of the theatre. All of these wars that don't matter, it's theatre to keep us screaming about the destruction, screaming about the loss of human life. We can sit there and scream for Palestine all we want. It will never be healed because it wasn't created to be healed. It was created to be perpetuated, to keep us there screaming about a situation we cannot fix, because by doing so we're not paying attention to the technology that is being rolled out under the carpet all around us, while we're busy distracted and frustrated and screaming about the loss of human life and the human suffering we see all around us. If you don't want the system to control your lives and to keep destroying the world, then stop supporting the system in every aspect and every form that it takes. We all go down the paths that are put there and provided for us to go down, all of which lead nowhere, which is exactly why they're put there. We're trying to address it by screaming at it. We're not looking at where it comes from. It all comes from our governments, and it's all being done for a reason, just to keep us distracted so that this whole digital dystopia can come online. And that's what it's always been about, folks, because that is the New World Order.
Flip.